Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So Kamala Harris has had a while now to come up with an answer to that zinger of a question. Since you're talking about turning the page and a new way forward and all that sloganeering business, how would you distinguish a Kamala Harris term from a Biden Harris term? She's had a while now, done a few interviews. She still hasn't really settled on an answer that works.
She should be prepared. Come up with one with your team. Something.
This is what she offered in that CNN town hall with Gloria Vanderbilt's kid yesterday.
Considering you have been in the position of vice president for the past 4 years under the Biden administration, how can we expect you to deviate from the direction of that administration compared to your own? How can we differentiate your policy and your beliefs from that of Biden's?
That's a great question, and thank you. Well, first of all, my administration will not be a continuation of the Biden administration. I bring to this role my own ideas and my own experience. I represent a new generation of leadership on a number of issues and believe that we have to actually take new approaches. For example, what we talked about in terms of housing. My experience that leads to that priority includes what I did to take on the big banks around the foreclosure crisis when I brought billions of dollars to homeowners that were the subject of predatory lending. I know what home ownership means to the American people, not to mention what it meant to my mother, who worked very hard and saved up so that by the time I was a teenager, she was able to buy our first home. I bring to it.
And it just went on from there. I mean, the policies are of the same kind, even if they're not specifically the same policy. In other words, it's the same approach in the housing sector or the healthcare sector that was taken by this administration and was taken by Joe Biden at the behest of the left. I mean, everything, all roads lead to and through government.
Well, she inferred that the Biden-Harris administration is a complete failure. But also, if you let that soundbite play on, Dan, she also mentioned again that she raised children, which has been my point of contention all day. All right.
And this is the same rap that she gave NBC earlier in the week. I'm running for president of the United States. Joe Biden is not. My presidency will be about bringing a new generation of leadership to America that is focused on the work we need to do to invest in the ambitions and aspirations of the American people. I mean, she wants to separate rhetorically without adding any substance to it, and it's not working. I mean, the polling that I know the D.C. press corps obsesses about, I know people are skeptical of, but it does provide direction. The polling is indicative of this flailing that she is experiencing. The Wall Street Journal poll that has her now upside down in terms of favorability, job approval, and has Trump actually slightly positive, 52-48 in terms of job approval, job he did. He also has a 10-point advantage when it comes to who do you trust on matters economic. I mean, those are real advantages. In addition, the Georgia poll, just looking at one battleground state, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution poll that has only 28% of men supporting Kamala Harris. She's down 30-plus points among men to Trump in Georgia. Again, all these people who think this is a toss-up, explain to me, based on the numbers that we're getting back, what her path to victory is.
Right. And the black vote, I mean, he got 8% of the black vote against Biden in 2020. Right now he's polling at 29%.
Well, where's that poll? What's that poll?
That was a NBC poll, I believe.
Yeah, I've seen 17, 18, but regardless, if he doubles his percentage, that's another. The Latino vote, the poll that came out, the Suffolk University USA Today poll that has Trump actually up 11, hard to believe, among Latino voters. I mean, all of those demographic numbers, all that data, again, explain to me what her path is. And clearly, she's struggling for a closing argument. If unless they're going to go with Hitler and friends with Epstein and think that's enough. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Andy Kroll, ProPublica national reporter, author of A Death on W Street: The Murder of Seth Rich in the Age of Conspiracy. Andy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be back as always.
So, what would you say to my assertion that I'm having a hard time discerning a path that would suggest that this race is so close as people say?
I'd say we could come at it from a couple of different directions. One is, let's look at the smartest polling averages that we have. That's Real Clear Politics, that's Silver Bulletin, that's 538, bringing together all the different polls. And if you look at those, it's basically a coin toss at the moment. I think there's a slight edge to Harris in a few of those. RCP, I think, is about dead even. But again, those are kind of reflecting everything building up to this moment. Those are a little bit backward looking. If you talk about some of that recent Georgia polling you just mentioned, it looks like that state might be turning toward her. And the most recent Wall Street Journal polling just out today that has him up by 2. At this point, if it's in that range, it's noise. And it could, again, go either way. That's within the the margin of error on these
it's not.
polls.
It's not. Not when you look. The top line numbers are interesting, but not that interesting. Battleground states, and then look at those demographics, and you overlay those demographics in battleground states, and you can't make those numbers work for Kamala Harris. Not where they are right now.
Yeah, I think the points that you guys made about the numbers and the margins, really, with minority voters have to be alarming if you're the Harris campaign, obviously. Bleeding Latino voters, bleeding black male voters. We know what the Harris strategy is here. They are making the election as much about Donald Trump, attacking Donald Trump, seizing on these latest comments from John Kelly, and every other line that they can to try to knock down his standing with female voters, with suburban college-educated voters. They know who their demographics are in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, in Arizona, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And this, very negative, very sort of hyper-partisan campaign is really an effort to try to drive up the people that they think can balance out these demographic changes, the potential shifts that we've just been talking about with minority voters and male voters. That's the strategy. Whether it works is another question, but that is clearly the strategy at this point.
I hear you. Look, something I said several weeks back about this campaign is that whoever talks least wins. And and I think that's sort of bearing out because I you're right in terms of what the strategy is: make Trump box office poison, make it a referendum on Trump. Right. But you. First of all, that's not really working. And secondly, that only works if the opponent is a safe place to land. If people say, it's a referendum on him and we can't have him, and so we're going to have her, and she's a safe place to land. The problem she's having is, one, his favorability rating is as good as it's ever been over the last 8 years, so that's not working. And two, she is increasingly not achieving that position as a safe place to land, in part because of answers to basic questions like she gave at last night's CNN town hall.
No, I think that's totally right. I think that you cannot just make this an anti-Trump campaign. There has to be some semblance of a message proactively from the Harris campaign. And obviously we've seen a decent amount from them on abortion, and that's clearly something the Trump campaign recognizes and is cognizant of, because you don't hear Donald Trump talking about that issue in the way that I think his more conservative base voters would like. But other than that, I think there was this moment maybe a month or so into the new Harris-Walz campaign where a lot of people were sitting thinking, okay, The sugar rush has worn off. The novelty has worn off. What is the message? What is the policy idea? What's the big sticky idea that this campaign is going to put forward, other than that Donald Trump is the worst, and he would destroy the country or whatever? And nothing has really come in that space. We haven't really gotten anything, and there have been a lot of interviews, little things here and there. I thought maybe Harris would, looking toward Michigan, for instance, try to draw a bigger contrast with Biden on Gaza and Israel, but that really hasn't happened either. So I think a lot of people were just sort of left thinking, well, what does she stand for? What is the difference here? What is she other than just an anti-Trump vote? And maybe that's what you're seeing here, with people not seeing a safe place to land, as you put it, in this decision.
She's doing exactly what Hillary Clinton did in 2016, 2 weeks before the election, calling Trump unhinged, unstable, incredibly dangerous, loving dictators. So that aside, I don't think that's going to stick either, because they don't have a solid message. But what Trump is doing is really, and so are his surrogates, really urging people to go out and vote early. So how are we to read America's early voting numbers so far? Because it's off to a roaring start.
I would read a few things into these really sky-high numbers, and I think that they're important to talk about. One is the Republican strategy on early voting. We knew this maybe 6 months ago, was a dramatic 180 from 2020, when Donald Trump, I think, honestly hurt himself by spending most of the year talking about how mail-in voting wasn't safe, early voting wasn't safe, and I think probably took some of his own vote total out by doing that, or at least, put some doubt in the minds of his own voters. And this time, totally different message. Vote early. It's safe. You can do it. It's the right thing to do if you support Donald Trump. And so I think that the composition of those early vote numbers are going to be much more tilted toward Republican. I'm not saying more than 50%, possibly in some states, but I'm just saying the composition, there will be a lot more Republicans in there than there were before. And I think that this also shows, you look at the early vote numbers in Georgia, North Carolina, other states, those early vote numbers show that turnout will probably be at 2020 levels. Again, just historically high. I mean, Donald Trump getting 80 million votes and not winning. We're probably looking at turnout numbers equally high or even higher this time around. In the past, maybe a decade ago, there was an argument, remember the Obama people making this argument, that high turnout elections were good for Democrats, lower turnout elections were good for Republicans. Again, this is what the sort of Democratic establishment like to say. That doesn't apply anymore. A super high turnout election, I still think, is just as likely to deliver a Trump victory as it is a Harris one. And again, what's different from 20 to 24 is you have Donald Trump and his team not demonizing or casting doubt on any method of voting like they did with early voting, mail-in voting in 20. They are saying, if you support us, vote early if you want, mail it in if you want, vote on election day if you want. That, based on what we know, would seem to suggest higher turnout on his side of the aisle than possibly even what we saw in 20, which was already an incredibly high turnout.
Where do you think congressional Democrats are right now in terms of their comfort level with this candidate and the impact she could have on the majority they have in the Senate and the majority they want in the House?
Anxious, in a word. I mean, I talked to some of these people in the course of my reporting. They're concerned. They're looking at the numbers in high-profile Senate races. Montana, Ohio, Michigan, obviously. They're looking at the polling in really sort of swingy House districts. I'm thinking about the Josh Riley race in New York, for instance, and seeing these razor-thin margins. And honestly, even seeing numbers like Tim Sheehy, Republican of Montana, numbers that show him consistently ahead of incumbent Democrat John Tester. And what's fascinating to see as well is in these races, the Tester race, the Sherrod Brown race in Ohio, others, you see Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, obviously, you see the Democrats kind of getting close to Donald Trump. Tammy
Right.
Baldwin has an ad praising how Donald Trump signed her Made in America legislation when he was president. That, to me, is an indication of not only an extremely close race, but a real concern that they are not going to get over the finish line because Donald Trump, as you said earlier, Dan, Donald Trump's favorable numbers are about as high now as they've been since he left office.
Andy Kroll, ProPublica national reporter, author of A Death on W Street, The Murder of Seth Rich and the Age of Conspiracy. Andy, thank you as always.
Always a pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Have you heard about this guy, Donald Rainwater?
I sure have. Guy was a deadbeat dad. Total loser. Not only did Rainwater repeatedly fail to pay his child support, he filed for bankruptcy and had his car repossessed. But what did a court find he spent the money on? Cigarettes.
Hasn't he run for office twice before and lost each time?
Sure has. Maybe that's why he wants the job, so taxpayers pay off all his debts.